There's nothing quite like owning the latest and greatest iPhone. To be able to use all the newest features, to show off the radical new design, to try out the next level cameras. Wait, hold on, that's not the newest iPhone. This is. Yep. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and all jokes aside, I have no problem with the third generation iPhone SE using the same old design we've seen for the better part of a decade. What really matters is how the phone performs and if it can live up to its place as the newest and cheapest iPhone out there. So today, let's ask the question, is the iPhone SE 3 worth buying? The design might be old, but there's a reason it stayed prevalent for so long. It's the natural evolution of the first iPhone, giving a not too big but not tiny 4.7-inch display and home button with practical and blazing fast Touch ID. The back is simple with the camera and Apple logo, and that's it. You've got the aluminum frame, and the glass allows for wireless charging. Though unfortunately we don't have MagSafe here, I was hoping for that. It's easy to look at this as yet another iteration of the iPhone 6, but the better comparison is the 2017 iPhone 8, and it's pretty much identical to that phone, which was pretty much identical to the 2020 iPhone SE 2. This is a tried and true phone layout, and it's one that not everyone is ready to move on from. For some of us watching this video, it might seem sort of silly to keep using a home button with those thick bezels, but there are some categories of people that this phone appeals to. The first one is those who prefer keeping their smartphones simple. Think your grandparents, people who even find the notion of leaving the home button to be scary and unnecessary. Maybe that's some harsh terminology, but this kind of phone appeals to them because they don't really want change. It's the last lifeline to the smartphones of old. You get a lot of people comparing the SE to Samsung's budget phone offerings, which certainly look much more modern, but they're being aimed at completely different types of people. Sort of. There's obviously a lot of overlap, and Apple does admittedly have on their page advertising that says that this is more power for less of a price, but in my eyes, this is who I think the phone should appeal to in the very least. And then there's a second category, which is perhaps a lot larger, and those are potential customers who just don't care. Bezels, home button, relatively small phone, simple design, doesn't matter as long as it gets the job done. This kind of person purely looks at the practicality of a smartphone and doesn't care about anything else. Their tastes will vary, but ultimately it's not the design of the iPhone SE that would make them avoid it. Does it have a good camera? Is battery life solid? Is performance fast? These are the type of questions you'll likely hear instead. Let's start off this review by describing what this newer SE brings over the past 2021, and don't worry, it won't take long because there's really only one major difference. The A15 Bionic chipset. This is the same processor that is in the iPhone 13 Pro, and it does offer a significant performance boost over the A13 in the 2020 SE. Even if it's unlikely, you would notice the difference right now on iOS, because the old SE is still very fast. But over time, the newer phone will keep faster speeds longer, and it should get about 2 more years of software support. Mind you, we're looking like a half-decade down the road for that, so not exactly the most crucial detail right now. The A15 does also mean that we get 5G networking for the first time on this design, and that could be a big deal for an extremely niche subset of users. Yeah, I say extremely niche because those actually wanting to buy an iPhone SE right now probably don't care about 5G. Someone who does care is likely more interested in a newer design and the benefits that come with all that. If the SE was a strong budget option, then this could be a very tempting smartphone, but it really kind of isn't. It's $430 US off contract, as in that's when you buy it without any kind of carrier plan. And the next step up is the iPhone 11, currently at about $500. The iPhone 11 is sort of better in nearly every way besides the chipset. As like the old SE, it also has the A13 and thus no 5G, but real life performance won't produce much difference, and what you do get here is the newer design with reduced bezels, a significantly larger display, and most importantly to me are 2 major factors: a better battery and a much better camera setup. Those 2 stand out because the kind of person looking at the SE very well might still care about both battery and photography. The iPhone 11 takes better shots, and it has an extra ultra-wide camera lens which allows you to get more in frame. You also have night mode on the iPhone 11, which helps keep photos bright even in extremely dark conditions. The SE3 has gotten better with this, but it still doesn't have any official kind of night mode. And the new SE's camera isn't bad, mind you. And in a few limited situations, I actually found that the SE performed better than the iPhone 11 thanks to the image processing with the A15. So for example, this photo here, you can see the HDR is actually much better with the SE as the sky is really blue, whereas on the 11 it's blown out. We'll talk more about the camera in a bit and how it compares to the SE2, but there's something else I want to talk about first. The battery life, I'm happy to say, also isn't bad. Apple did actually make the battery slightly bigger than the SE2, and they say actual life has gotten better by about 2 hours. If we look at Apple's own numbers for some perspective, the 2020 iPhone SE got about 13 hours of video playback before dying. The iPhone SE3 gets about 15 hours of video playback, that's where that 2 hours comes from, and the iPhone 11 gets 17 hours. This actually makes for about the same battery life as the iPhone 12 mini. I've heard both good and bad things from 12 mini owners, so take that as you will. Overall, my biggest complaint with the SE2 was battery life, so I'm glad that's better here. It's not great, but I would say it's decent enough for low to moderate usage, and for the target audience, I think it'll be fine for most. Of course, 5G will drain the battery faster, but yeah, it should be fine. I feel like that kind of sums up the SE3, at least for its target audience. There is one department this phone isn't just fine though, and that would be the technical specifications. Everyone talks about how the SE looks so much worse than similarly priced competitors with their lack of bezels and beautiful OLED panels, but the SE absolutely blows them out of the water in pure raw technical performance and potential. This might not make a huge difference today, as those other phones probably aren't too slow, but the SE will get years and years of updates, whereas Androids are extremely lucky to get more than 1 or 2. Seriously, even the first iPhone SE is still running the latest version of iOS 15, and it's from early 2016, 6 years ago. It's to the point of absurdity, and while I don't think this phone will last quite that long, 5 years is a pretty realistic expectation, and one unheard of on the Android side for even the $1,000 phones, much less the budget or mid-range ones. The issue here for the SE is that all that kind of applies to the iPhone 11. It still has only the A13, but it's very fast, and the benefits we've mentioned, with it being bigger and better camera, it makes the SE kind of a hard pill to swallow for only $100 less. Now, one thing they do have in common that critics strongly dislike, however, is the display. Oh yes, that controversial Apple Retina display. The iPhone SE features a 4.7-inch LCD with a resolution of 750 by 1334, making for a pixel density of 326 pixels per inch. That's a lot of numbers, and they don't really matter. What does is that it's not great in today's world of overpowered and ridiculously high-density displays, lacking both vibrant colors and true blacks of OLED, along with the ultra-sharp clarity of higher resolutions. But here's the truth. Are you ready? This screen is fine. In fact, I'll say it, it's more than fine, it's good. Yeah, I know it's a good screen. It looks good, and I don't even notice the lower resolution going to it from my iPhone 13 Pro. All I notice is the lower refresh rate, which is 60 Hz, but that's to be expected with an iPhone like this. There's nothing special about this screen, but those blasting it all the time are being overdramatic. If you do want a nice screen, there are plenty of Androids in the mid-range that could satisfy you, or you could pay more for the iPhone 12 or better, so you've always got options depending on what's important to you. And speaking of the iPhone 12, and more specifically the 12 mini, this is a small phone, at least relative to what we're used to nowadays. Physically, it's already small, but it also has big bezels, which makes the actual screen space even smaller. Side note, if you like small screens, you've got to be loving the iPhone lineup right now. They're pretty much the only ones consistently doing small screens pretty darn well, and that's because not only is the SE an option, but if you have a larger budget, there's also the iPhone 12 mini and 13 mini, with the much nicer OLED screens and newer designs. And they're both, without a doubt, much more worth it than the SE3, if any of that sounds good to you. And that's kind of the pressing point that keeps coming up. There's always an iPhone that seems to be better value than the SE3. For simply budget users, the iPhone 11 is better, and for those who like small phones, both the 12 or 13 mini should be more appealing. It makes it tough to properly recommend this device for anyone, even with the improvements it's brought this time around. And to reiterate, the main differences are battery life, which we've covered, the camera, which we're about to cover, and of course, the big difference that makes for pretty much everything, the chipset. It's because of the A15 over the A13 the camera has seen any improvement, but the camera here is like the last generation, 12 megapixels, which was like the iPhone 8 before it. This is the iPhone 8's camera. It can still record video in 4K 60, and the selfie camera on the front is still 7 megapixels, but even so, the photos themselves supposedly benefit from improved HDR, Apple's Deep Fusion image processing, photographic styles, and probably another billion under the hood stuff that all include just as many unnecessary buzzwords. In real life usage, there's very little difference, with a lot of small things making the SE3 a bit stronger in certain situations. I feel like it handles shadows and just dark areas in general general a bit better. Minute details seem to be a bit more clear. I'm really no photography expert, not even close, and honestly, I kind of like it that way because for these types of videos, I feel like I can speak from a more average consumer point of view, but I think the best way to see how good a camera is by showing. I will say it is really impressive what they've managed to push out of this camera sensor. It is small, and they've managed to make it almost compete with the iPhone 11, and with the processing, even as we said earlier, be a little bit better in some cases. So definitely huge props to Apple's image processing. Now just imagine how good it'd be if they actually put the iPhone 11 camera sensor in here. And all these benefits should apply to the selfie camera as well, which I don't have any complaints about. 7 megapixels is more than good enough for a phone at this price range, in my opinion, and Apple's software makes it good. I really do wish we had a night mode with this phone. Apple has had it since 2019, but the SE3 should handle itself better in darker scenarios, and so yeah, the camera is good enough, but it's still so far behind Apple's other offerings, and I'm sure many would tell you the competition on the Android side as well, which I won't go into. It's a fine camera, it takes fine photos, but the sensor itself is physically smaller than what's on the iPhone 11 and better, meaning ultimately less light can get in and a less impressive image will come as a result of that. I think even just slapping the iPhone 11's camera on here would have made the SE worth it, but as it is right now, the camera manages to sit on the fence between good and bad, teetering around in mediocrity for a 2022 $429 smartphone. Video recording, however, is as usual pretty good. Apple is so good at video compared to anyone else, and even with an older camera sensor like this, it does a great job. Considering this is an iPhone 8 camera with the power of an iPhone 13 Pro, I'd say this is all about as good as you could hope for. Now, what I'd really like to see is the camera from the iPhone 4 or something with the A15 chipset. That would be something. The iPhone SE3, as always, has its pros and cons, its ups and downs, but the problem is one side doesn't seem to fully outweigh the other. It's hard for me to say that the phone is worth it, but it doesn't seem not worth it either. Going into this video, I didn't expect it would be very long, and it's already surpassed those expectations, as most of my videos seem to do these days. But the SE3 ultimately is a good enough phone that isn't amazing value, but it's not terrible either at $429. Most won't actually pay that amount, at least up front, assuming you go through a carrier, and I'm sure there will be plenty of contracts offering $0 down, making a tempting option for many. This is a phone that I think will work really well for certain subsets of users, someone who wants an overpowered smartphone for as cheap as possible, which this is thanks to the A15, someone who doesn't care about the design or size and so on and just needs a phone that'll perform well and do the job, and then those who actively prefer the home button and don't want to move on to the newer designs. Every single time I'm going to recommend the iPhone 11 over the SE3, but for what it is, the phone has managed to impress me, even if only just a little. So with that, I think I'm right about done here. This is always a weird video to do because I'm torn on how hard on the phone I should be versus forgiving of the design. Ultimately, I think it's super important to keep in mind the type of people who will use this phone, and those guys down in the comment section saying this phone is horrible and the screen is the worst ever, yeah, those guys are definitely not the kind of person this phone is for. If you found this video helpful or interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. If you're interested in this phone or you have the last iPhone SE, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, or if you already got it. Definitely curious to hear what you have to say because this is kind of such a strange phone right now considering the rest of the market. You know, Apple really is standing out by keeping this design around. I'm not fully against it. I wish they did a few things better, but overall I'm glad the battery's a bit better. The phone serves a purpose for the right kind of person. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.